It's one thing to know how to quilt a feather. It's a completely different thing to know when and how to use it on your quilts. Hi, I'm Angela Walters from Quilting is My Therapy, and welcome to week 3 of the Free Motion Challenge, Quilting Along, Mastering Feathers. We've already learned how to quilt what I like to call the basic and the custom feather, but in this video, this is where we get to start having fun by quilting them in the background areas. I have so much to say on this subject that I'm going to break this up into 2 different videos. So be sure to stick around to the end of the video. I'll tell you instructions on how you can check out the second part of this video series. But first, let's look at the background area of our panel and decide exactly how we want to place our feathers. I could quilt a feather that runs along those swirls. That would be a great way to kind of frame or add that effect to it. Now, I am only the expert of my opinion, but I think that the spine of the feather looks best when it's curvy. For the smaller area, I think it might be better to use the more gentle curve. That way I can make sure that my feather fits in the area. And I'm going to repeat this line along the whole area. Now, this is how I would mark it if I wanted that feather to flow along the line of swirls. But let's pretend on the other side I want to do something a little different. Instead of having my feather run along that swirl, I can quilt it so that they look like they intersect that main swirl line. The benefit of that is that it makes the feathers shorter. Instead of quilting long continuous feathers, I can work within a smaller area. I'm still going to use my line as my guide, and I can even change up the orientation of it if I want to give it a slightly different look. If you don't like that effect, we can make them look like they're coming out of the center of the swirl. This is going to give it a little bit more of a custom look, and as a bonus, it doesn't take much longer. For those of you quilting on a sewing machine, this might actually be appealing because you can still start towards the center, quilt one feather out, and then quilt the other. Once you're ready to start quilting, you can decide if you want to do the basic or the custom feather. You don't have to do both, just pick one that feels comfortable to you. Before we get to quilting though, let's talk about thread. If you purchased the thread collection that coordinates, I want to encourage you to use the pink color, whether it's the glide pink or the Aurifil pink, the darker of the two. What this is going to do is stand out just a little bit on the background so that when we come back and fill around it, it'll be a little bit easier to see what we're working with. However, if you're thinking, I'm not super comfortable with my feathers showing up, you can go with the lightest option, the cream color, whether that's in the glide or the Aurifil. Or if you're feeling a little adventurous and you're thinking, ooh, I'm going to go right in the middle. In the glide, that would be the yellow, or in the Aurifil, that's going to be the thread color 2315, the lightest pink. If I can encourage you to be just a little brave, go ahead and use the pink one. That way when we add our filler around it, we'll be able to see the difference between them. But ultimately, it's up to you. So that you can see what I'm actually doing while I'm quilting, I'm still going to stick with the darker of the colors. Start by quilting along the spine of your feather. When I get to the end of my area, I'm going to start quilting my feathers. Now we know I like the more custom feathers, so that's what I'll do first, but ultimately you can do either one. If you wanted, you could quilt one whole side of your feather and then come back and do the other. Or if you didn't want to do that, you can actually quilt these in groups of 2 by doing 2 to one side and then 2 to the other. The benefit of doing it this way is that it's a little bit more efficient, right? I'm quilting both sides as I make my way across the quilt. This quilting both sides of the feather trick is nothing that I came up with. That was a tip my good friend Kimmy Bruner shared with me during one of her classes. Since I'm filling my feather within a defined area, I'm going to make it kind of smaller to really fit in there. So I'm only going to extend my petals out about 2 or 3 inches. Now I know I'm leaving a lot of gap on either side of my feather, and that's intentional because we're going to come back in the next video and learn what to fill around it with. As the area that I have to fill in gets narrower, that means my petals will be smaller. And it might look like I have a lopsided feather. It might look weird now, but eventually we're going to come back in and fill all around it, and it's going to become part of the overall design. Well, I'm going to keep quilting my feather along the spine, and then we'll see the other layouts that we're going to be working with. Up to this point, we've just quilted one side of the feather, but now we're going to quilt both sides. Here's the thing. If you've tried quilting both sides of a feather, there's a good chance that you've noticed that one side looks better than the other. If that's the case, then congratulations, you're completely normal. We all have a dominant side that's easier. So if you see that, instead of being frustrated and getting discouraged, think of it as, dang, I'm almost there. I'm so close, I'm gonna keep going. Now that I finished one side of the quilt, I'm ready to do the other side with my slightly different markings. Since I've already done the custom feather, I think I'll do the basic feather for this option. One question that has come up is, why do I quilt my basic feather from the top to the bottom? Well, I have a very good answer for that. Because that's what I've always done. If you prefer to quilt your petals from the bottom up, that's completely fine. Definitely do what works for you. Because I like to keep it interesting, I'm going to quilt the other shorter one with the custom feather. Well, now that I have my shorter feathers done, I'm going to go ahead and quilt along the last spine. The reason I'm incorporating this kind of shape into the quilt is I want to talk about quilting petals along the inside of a curve. The way that you treat those will be just slightly different than you would on the outside. So as I start quilting them, there's going to come a point where one is almost going to lay right on top of a previous one. Sure, if you look at this separately, it's going to look a little weird, but when you take it all into consideration, it's going to be fine. Now, as I go around the outer curve, I'm going to have the exact opposite problem. I'm going to have more room, so these petals will get a little bit bigger as I extend around the outside of that curve. Well, I'm going to finish quilting this side of it, and then we'll see what it looks like to quilt these on the long arm. If you're quilting along with me on the panel, go ahead and do a feather on each side of your swirls. Then in the next video, I'm going to show you how what you put around it is going to determine whether we're going to highlight or hide it. So be sure to check out that second video. I'll catch you over there. Happy quilting!